On a frozen February morning in 2005, in the small town of Ronan, Montana, nestled against the Mission Mountains where the wind cuts across open fields like a blade, a young woman named Sarah Whitehorse vanished from her bedroom while her husband claimed to be in the kitchen making breakfast. She was 23 years old, a nursing student at Salish Kootenai College, and the mother of a 4-year-old daughter named Emma. Her car sat in the driveway, keys on the hook, purse on the counter, coffee half poured in a mug that would grow cold on the kitchen table. The house was locked from the inside. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints in the snow beyond those leading to and from the chicken coop her husband had visited that morning. For 17 years, the question haunted everyone who knew her. Where did Sarah Whitehorse go, and who last saw her alive? Ronan sits in the Flathead Valley of northwestern Montana, population just under 2,000, the kind of place where neighbors still wave from pickup trucks and Friday night football games draw half the town. The Mission Mountains rise to the east like a wall of granite and pine, their peaks white with snow 8 months of the year. To the west, Flathead Lake stretches blue and vast, the largest natural freshwater lake west of the Mississippi. In winter, the cold settles into the valley and stays there, temperatures dropping to 10 below zero, the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache when you breathe. The town itself is modest, built along Highway 93, a 2-lane road that connects Missoula to the south with Kalispell to the north. There is a main street with a post office, a grocery store, a diner called the Range Rider where ranchers drink coffee at 5 in the morning. Most families work the ranches that spread across the valley floor, raising cattle and hay, or they work construction, driving to Missoula or Paulson for jobs. The Flathead Reservation encompasses the area, home to the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, and Sarah Whitehorse was Salish, descended from families who had lived in these mountains for generations. Sarah had married Daniel Whitehorse in 2001, when she was 19 and he was 25. They met at a community gathering in Paulson, just 15 miles north, and friends said Daniel pursued her with intensity, showing up at her parents' house with flowers, writing her letters, promising her a life together. He worked at a lumber mill outside of town, steady work that paid enough for a small house on Care Dam Road, a narrow gravel lane that wound through fields southeast of Ronan. The house was a single-story ranch, pale blue siding, white trim, a small porch where Sarah hung wind chimes that sang in the constant wind. Behind the house was a chicken coop Daniel had built, and beyond that, open fields stretching to the tree line. Their daughter Emma was born in 2001, a quiet child with dark hair like her mother, and Sarah doted on her, taking her to the library in Paulson, teaching her to recognize birds, reading to her every night before bed. Sarah had enrolled at Salish Kootenai College in 2004, determined to become a nurse, driving the 30 miles to Pueblo 3 days a week for classes. Her classmates described her as serious, focused, always arriving early, always prepared. She kept a notebook filled with careful handwriting, notes about anatomy and pharmacology, and she had told her mother just weeks before she vanished that she was on track to graduate in 2 years. Those who knew the couple said the marriage seemed solid enough, though Daniel was quiet, reserved, the type who spoke in short sentences and spent evenings in the garage working on an old Ford truck he was rebuilding. Sarah's mother, Alina, had noticed her daughter seemed tired lately, distracted, but when pressed, Sarah said it was just the stress of school and taking care of Emma. There were no arguments anyone could recall, no public fights, nothing that suggested trouble beneath the surface of their daily lives. February 10, 2005 was a Thursday. The temperature that morning was 14 degrees, the sky the color of old iron, clouds sitting low over the valley. Sarah had a shift at the college library that afternoon, scheduled to work from 2 until 6. She had told Daniel the night before that she would drop Emma at her mother's house in Ronan at noon, attend her shift, then pick Emma up on the way home. It was a routine they followed twice a week, predictable, ordinary. Daniel later told investigators he woke at 6:30 that morning. Sarah was still asleep beside him. Emma was asleep in her room down the hall. He said he got dressed quietly, pulled on boots and a heavy coat, and went outside to check on the chickens, a task he performed every morning before work. The snow in the yard was undisturbed except for his own footprints leading to the coop and back. He said he spent perhaps 10 minutes outside, the cold biting through his coat, his breath fogging in the air. When he returned to the house, he stomped the snow off his boots on the porch and came inside. He said Sarah was awake then, sitting at the kitchen table in her robe, hair pulled back, looking at her textbook. He said he started making breakfast, eggs and toast, while Sarah went to wake Emma. He said he heard the shower running in the bathroom. He said he plated the eggs, set them on the table, called for Sarah. No answer. He said he walked down the hall, knocked on the bedroom door. No answer. He said he opened the door and the room was empty. The bed was made. Sarah's textbook was closed on the nightstand. Her slippers were beside the bed. Clear's throat. Daniel said he checked the bathroom. Empty. He checked Emma's room. Emma was there, playing with dolls on the floor, still in her pajamas. He asked Emma where her mother was. Emma looked up at him and said Mommy had gone to get something from the car. Daniel said he went outside, looked in the car. Empty. Sarah's purse was inside on the counter. Her keys were on the hook. Her coat was hanging in the closet. Her boots were by the door. Daniel called Alina at 7:45. His voice on the phone was flat, measured. He said, "Sarah's not here. I can't find her." Alina said she asked him what he meant. He said, "She was here and now she's not. I don't know where she went." Alina said she felt something cold move through her chest, something like dread that had no name yet. Alina drove to the house immediately, the road slick with ice, arriving just after 8. She found Daniel in the kitchen, Emma still in her pajamas, cartoons playing on the television. Alina searched the house herself, opening closets, checking under beds, as if Sarah might be hiding, though she knew how absurd that sounded even as she did it. She called Sarah's phone. It rang in the bedroom, plugged into the charger beside the bed. By 9, Alina had called the Lake County Sheriff's Office. A deputy arrived at 9:30, a young man named Travis Keller who had gone to high school with Sarah's younger brother. Deputy Keller walked through the house, took notes, asked Daniel to describe the morning again. Daniel repeated the same sequence of events. Woke up, checked the chickens, came inside, started breakfast. Sarah was gone. Deputy Keller asked if they had argued. Daniel said no. He asked if Sarah had seemed upset lately. Daniel said no. He asked if Sarah had any reason to leave. Daniel said no, she loved Emma, she would never leave Emma. Deputy Keller examined the doors and windows, all locked from the inside except the front door, which Daniel said he had unlocked when he came back in from the chicken coop. No signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle, no blood, no overturned furniture, nothing out of place except for Sarah herself. Deputy Keller stood in the kitchen and looked at the coffee mug on the table, half full, and the eggs growing cold on the plate, and he felt the first stirring of something wrong, though he could not yet name what it was. By noon, 4 deputies were searching the property, walking the fields behind the house, checking the chicken coop, the barn, the tree line. They found nothing. No tracks in the snow except Daniel's own footprints to and from the coop. No disturbance in the fields. The wind chimes on the porch sang their thin, metallic song, and the sky pressed down gray and heavy. Alina took Emma to her house in town, holding her granddaughter close, whispering that Mommy would be home soon, though she did not believe it. Emma asked where Mommy had gone, and Alina had no answer except to say they were looking for her. Everyone was looking for her. Part 2. The Investigation. By the afternoon of February 10th, the search had expanded. The Lake County Sheriff's Office called in deputies from neighboring counties, and by nightfall, 20 officers were combing the area around the Whitehorse house. They brought search dogs, German shepherds trained to track scent, and the dogs circled the house, noses to the ground, but picked up no trail leading away from the property. The handlers said it was as if Sarah had simply stopped existing at the edge of the porch. Volunteers from Ronan and Paulson began arriving the next morning. Ranchers and teachers and store clerks, people who had known Sarah or known of her, people who could not sit at home while a young mother was missing. They formed search lines and walked the fields, poking at snowdrifts with sticks, looking for any sign, any clue. They searched the tree line where the forest thickened, calling Sarah's name into the silence. The Mission Mountains loomed above them, indifferent, ancient. The local newspaper, the Lake County Leader, ran Sarah's picture on the front page. A young woman with long dark hair and a slight smile, her arms around Emma at a park. The headline read, "Ronan Woman Missing. Search Continues." Television stations from Missoula sent reporters who stood in front of the Whitehorse house and spoke into cameras about the mystery, the young mother who had vanished without a trace. Neighbors were interviewed, and they said Sarah was kind, quiet, devoted to her daughter, the last person anyone would expect to simply disappear. Those who knew Daniel said he seemed strange in those first days, his affect flat, his responses to questions brief and almost mechanical. He sat in the living room while searchers moved through his property, his hands folded in his lap, his face expressionless. When Alina came to check on him, bringing food because she could think of nothing else to do, Daniel thanked her in a voice that had no emotion in it. She later told investigators that he had not cried, had not seemed frantic, had not exhibited any of the panic she would have expected from a husband whose wife had vanished. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the inconsistencies, small things that did not quite fit. Daniel had said he checked on the chickens at 6:30, spent 10 minutes outside, returned to find Sarah awake. But the timeline seemed compressed. If Sarah had been asleep when he left and awake when he returned, and if she had time to wake, come to the kitchen, open her textbook, where was the time for her to then disappear before he started making breakfast? Deputy Keller reviewed his notes and realized Daniel had said he heard the shower running, but when he checked the bathroom, it was empty. If Sarah had been in the shower, where did she go between turning on the water and Daniel checking the room? Clear's throat. Investigators asked Daniel if they could search his truck, the old Ford he kept in the garage. He agreed immediately. They found nothing unusual: tools, a spare tire, fast food wrappers, a blanket. They asked if they could examine his boots, the ones he wore to check the chickens that morning. He handed them over. The soles were caked with snow and mud, consistent with walking through the yard. They asked if they could search the chicken coop. He said of course. They found chickens, feed, nesting boxes. Nothing more. But there were other details, small things that accumulated like snow. Daniel had told Alina on the phone that he could not find Sarah, but he had not called any of Sarah's friends, had not driven around the neighborhood looking for her, had not checked with neighbors to see if anyone had seen her. He had simply called Alina and waited. When deputies asked why he had not searched for her himself, he said he assumed she would come back, that maybe she had gone for a walk. In 14-degree weather, without a coat, without boots, without her phone. The search continued for 5 days, then a week, then 2 weeks. Helicopters flew over the valley, their rotors thumping against the cold air. Divers searched Flathead Lake, breaking through ice to peer into the dark water. Caves in the Mission Mountains were explored, abandoned buildings checked. Nothing. Sarah Whitehorse had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. Investigators focused more intently on Daniel. They asked him to take a polygraph test. He refused, saying his attorney had advised against it. They asked if they could examine his phone records. He said he had nothing to hide and provided them. The records showed no unusual calls, no pattern that suggested an affair or a plan to run away. They asked about his marriage. He said it was good, normal, no problems. They asked about finances. He said they were managing, nothing unusual. They asked if Sarah had ever threatened to leave. He said never. She loved Emma too much to leave. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the ground shift beneath you as small inconsistencies pile up into something heavy and dark, you understand what Alina was feeling. She sat in her living room with Emma, watching her granddaughter draw pictures of a house and a woman and a little girl, and she thought about the son-in-law she had welcomed into her family, the man who now seemed like a stranger. She thought about his calm voice on the phone that morning, the way he had said Sarah was gone as if he were reporting the weather. Deputies interviewed Sarah's classmates at Salish Kootenai College. They said Sarah had seemed normal the week before she vanished, maybe a little tired but nothing alarming. They said she had talked about an upcoming exam, had borrowed a textbook from one of them, had mentioned taking Emma to see her grandmother that weekend. There was no indication she was planning to leave, no goodbye that felt like goodbye. The physical evidence was maddeningly sparse. No blood in the house, no fibers, no hair that did not belong. The forensic team had gone over the property with luminol, looking for traces of blood that might have been cleaned up but found nothing. The car had been examined, the trunk, the interior, the undercarriage. Nothing. It was as if Sarah had been lifted from the house by invisible hands and carried away into the winter sky. By March, the search effort slowed. Volunteers stopped showing up, the helicopters stopped flying, the news crews moved on to other stories. The case was classified as a missing person investigation, still active but with no new leads, no new evidence, no direction to follow. Daniel returned to work at the lumber mill. Alina kept Emma, unable to imagine sending her back to live with Daniel, though legally she had no grounds to refuse. Daniel did not fight her on it. He said Emma should stay with her grandmother for now, until things settled. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves that they knew what had happened, they just could not prove it. They believed Sarah was gone, not missing but gone in a way that meant she would never be found. They believed Daniel knew more than he was saying. But belief is not evidence, and suspicion is not proof, and so the case remained open, unsolved, a file that grew dustier with each passing month. Part 3. The Silence. Months became years. Emma grew from a 4-year-old who asked when mommy was coming home to a 7-year-old who stopped asking, the question replaced by silence. Alina raised her, enrolled her in school, took her to dance classes, tried to give her a normal childhood in the shadow of an absence that filled every room. Emma drew pictures sometimes, and Alina noticed that the figures in the drawings were always the same: a grandmother, a little girl, and an empty space where a mother should have been. Daniel visited Emma once a month, showing up at Alina's house on Sunday afternoons, sitting stiffly on the couch while Emma played nearby. He brought gifts, dolls, and coloring books, but he did not know how to talk to his daughter, and the visits were awkward, filled with long silences. Alina watched him, looking for something, some crack in the facade, some sign of guilt or grief, but his face remained blank, unreadable. In 2007, 2 years after Sarah vanished, Daniel sold the house on Care Dam Road. He moved to Missoula, 80 miles south, taking a job at a different lumber mill, leaving Ronan behind. Alina heard through mutual acquaintances that he had started dating someone, a woman he met at a bar, and the news made her physically ill. She thought about Sarah, about the life her daughter should have had, and she felt a rage that had no outlet, no resolution. For those who have ever carried the weight of unanswered questions, who have lain awake at night replaying every conversation, every moment, searching for the thing you missed. You understand what those years were like for Alina. She thought about the morning Sarah vanished, the phone call from Daniel, the flatness in his voice. She thought about the locked doors, the untouched purse, the coffee growing cold. She thought about the way Daniel had not searched for his wife, had not seemed frantic, had not seemed anything at all. Clear's throat. Emma started having nightmares when she was 8. She would wake up crying, saying she dreamed of a dark place, cold and quiet, where someone was calling for help but no one could hear. Alina held her, whispered that it was just a dream, but she wondered what memories lived in her granddaughter's mind. Memories from that morning when Emma was 4 and her mother disappeared. Emma had been in her room playing with dolls. What had she heard? What had she seen? In 2010, 5 years after Sarah vanished, a hiker found human remains in the Mission Mountains, 15 miles east of Ronan, off a trail that led to a remote alpine lake. The remains were partial, scattered by animals, but dental records were compared, and the victim was identified as a woman from Kalispell who had gone missing in 2008, unrelated to Sarah's case. The discovery made news, and Alina felt hope and dread in equal measure. Hope that Sarah might finally be found, dread of what that would mean. But the remains were not Sarah's, and the hope died like embers going cold. Daniel remarried in 2012. Alina learned about it from a mutual friend who saw the announcement on social media, a photograph of Daniel and a woman named Rebecca, both smiling, standing in front of a courthouse in Missoula. Alina felt something break inside her, some last fragile belief that Daniel might still care, might still be looking, might still grieve. She realized he had moved on as if Sarah had never existed, as if 7 years of marriage and a daughter meant nothing. Emma was 11 by then, quiet and watchful, old enough to understand more than she said. She asked Alina one night if her father had hurt her mother, and Alina did not know how to answer. She said the investigators had never been able to prove anything, that they did not know for certain what had happened. Emma nodded and did not ask again, but Alina saw the knowledge in her eyes, the understanding that some questions have answers you cannot speak aloud. The marriage between Daniel and Rebecca lasted 2 years. In 2014, Rebecca filed for separation, and neighbors in Missoula later told investigators that they had heard arguments coming from the house Daniel and Rebecca shared, loud voices, doors slamming. Rebecca left with a suitcase in the middle of the night, and when asked later, she would only say that Daniel was not the man she thought she married, that there was something cold in him, something that frightened her. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the ground shift beneath you as small inconsistencies pile up into something heavy and dark, you understand what Rebecca must have felt. She had married a man who seemed quiet, reserved, maybe damaged by the loss of his first wife, but she came to believe that the damage was not from loss but from something else, something she could not name. Emma turned 16 in 2017. She was a sophomore in high school, a good student, quiet like her mother. She lived with Alina still, visited her father occasionally, though the visits had grown less frequent over the years. She had started asking questions about her mother, about the investigation, about why no one had been arrested. Alina gave her the files she had kept, newspaper clippings and police reports obtained through public records requests, and Emma read them late at night in her room, trying to piece together a story that made sense from fragments that did not fit. In the spring of 2018, Emma had a conversation with a school counselor, a woman named Patricia Vega who had worked with trauma survivors and missing person cases. Emma told her things she had never told her grandmother, small memories from that morning in 2005, things she had not understood when she was 4, but understood now. She said she remembered hearing her parents arguing the night before her mother vanished, their voices low but tense. She said she remembered her father waking her early the next morning, before the sun was up, and carrying her to the car wrapped in a blanket. She said she remembered being cold, very cold, and then being back in her bed when she woke up later. Patricia Vega contacted the Lake County Sheriff's Office the next day. Part 4. The Revelation. Detective Lisa Nordquist had joined the Lake County Sheriff's Office in 2015, 10 years after Sarah Whitehorse vanished. She had reviewed the cold case files as part of her training, and Sarah's case had stayed with her, the locked doors and missing woman and husband who seemed too calm. When Patricia Vega called in April 2018 with information about Emma's memories, Detective Nordquist felt something click into place, pieces of a puzzle she had been assembling without knowing it. She interviewed Emma on April 23, 2018, with a leaner present and Patricia Vega there for support. Emma was 16, poised and serious, and she spoke carefully, trying to remember details from 13 years earlier. She said, "I remember being in the car. It was dark outside. I remember the seat was cold through the blanket. I remember my father driving, and I remember stopping. I think we were in the trees. I remember him getting out of the car and opening the back, and I remember the sound of something heavy being moved." Detective Nordquist asked Emma if she remembered anything else. Emma closed her eyes, thinking. She said, "I remember going home. I remember being put back in my bed. I remember waking up later and my father asking me where my mother was, and I didn't understand the question because I had been asleep." Clears throat. Detective Nordquist obtained a warrant to search Daniel's property in Missoula, though he no longer lived in the house on Care Dam Road. She also requested a warrant to examine his current vehicle, a newer model pickup truck, and his phone records from 2005, which had been preserved in the case file. She assembled a team of forensic investigators and a cadaver dog handler. On May 2, 2018, they executed the search warrant. Daniel was working at the lumber mill when detectives arrived at his apartment in Missoula. They searched the apartment, the truck, and they re-examined the old Ford he had kept in storage, the one from 2005. The cadaver dog alerted on the old Ford, specifically on the bed of the truck under the toolbox. Forensic technicians dismantled the toolbox and examined the truck bed beneath it. They found traces of blood, minute amounts, degraded by time and weather, but enough for DNA analysis. They sent the samples to the state crime lab in Helena. While they waited for results, Detective Nordquist re-interviewed everyone connected to the case. She spoke to the deputies who had conducted the original investigation, now retired or working other jobs. She spoke to Sarah's classmates, her family, her friends. She spoke to Daniel's coworkers from 2005, asking if he had seemed different in the days after Sarah vanished. One coworker, a man named Tom Brennan, said, "I remember he seemed tired. He said he wasn't sleeping well. But he didn't seem upset, just tired." The DNA results came back on June 15, 2018. The blood in the truck bed matched Sarah Whitehorse's DNA profile, extracted from a hairbrush that had been preserved as evidence in 2005. Detective Nordquist requested a warrant for Daniel's arrest. The warrant was issued on June 18, 2018, charging him with deliberate homicide in the death of Sarah Whitehorse. Detectives arrested him at the lumber mill in Missoula at 3:40 in the afternoon. Co-workers later said he did not resist, did not seem surprised, simply put down the lumber he was carrying and held out his hands for the cuffs. The arrest made national news. Headlines read, "Montana man arrested in wife's 2005 disappearance," and "Cold case solved after 13 years, daughter's memory key to arrest." Television crews returned to Ronan, standing in front of the old house on Care Dam Road, now occupied by a different family, reporting on the case that had haunted the community for over a decade. Those who knew Daniel split into two camps. Some said they had always known, had always felt something was wrong, had always suspected. Others said they were shocked, that Daniel had seemed like a normal man, a good father, someone who had simply lost his wife to tragic circumstances. Elena released a statement through an attorney saying she was grateful for the arrest, that she had never stopped believing justice would come, that her granddaughter could finally have answers. The trial began in March 2019. The prosecution's case was built on circumstantial evidence, the blood in the truck, Emma's memories, the timeline inconsistencies from the morning Sarah vanished. The defense argued that the blood could have been from any number of innocent explanations, that Emma's memories were unreliable after 13 years, that there was no body, no proof of death, no murder weapon. Emma testified, now 17, wearing a dark blue dress, her hair pulled back like her mother used to wear hers. She spoke quietly into the microphone, describing the memory of being in the car, the cold, the darkness, the sound of something heavy being moved. She said, "I didn't understand what I was remembering until I was older, but I know what I saw, I know what I heard." The prosecution called forensic experts who testified about the blood evidence, about the odds of it being present in the truck bed by chance. They called the original deputies who testified about Daniel's strange affect, his lack of concern, his refusal to take a polygraph. They called Sarah's mother, Elena, who testified about the phone call that morning, about Daniel's flat voice, about the way he had not searched for his wife. The defense called Daniel to the stand. He testified for 6 hours, maintaining his innocence, saying he had no idea what happened to Sarah, that he woke up and she was gone, that he loved her, that he missed her every day. He said the blood in the truck could have been from a dozen things, that Sarah had ridden in the truck many times, that maybe she had cut herself helping him load lumber or tools. He said Emma's memories were the confused dreams of a traumatized child, that she could not possibly remember accurately after so long. Clears throat. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On April 9, 2019, they returned a verdict, guilty of deliberate homicide. Daniel showed no emotion as the verdict was read, his face blank, his hands folded on the table in front of him. Elena wept in the gallery, Emma beside her, both of them holding each other. At sentencing, the judge noted that without a body, without a confession, the case would remain incomplete, but the evidence was sufficient to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Daniel Whitehorse had caused his wife's death and concealed her remains. He sentenced Daniel to 60 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Daniel was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. Reporters shouted questions at him, asking where Sarah's body was, asking if he had anything to say to his daughter. He looked straight ahead and said nothing. The investigation into Sarah's location continues. In 2020, search teams returned to the Mission Mountains, focusing on areas accessible by truck in 2005, looking for any sign of remains. They have found nothing. Sarah Whitehorse is still missing, her body still hidden somewhere in the vast wilderness of northwestern Montana, and Daniel has never spoken about where she might be. Closing. For 13 years, Sarah Whitehorse existed in that strange space between missing and gone, between hope and certainty, a young mother who vanished from a locked house on a frozen February morning. Her case became a symbol of the questions that haunt small communities, the knowledge that someone among you knows the truth and will not speak it. Emma grew up without a mother, raised by a grandmother who never stopped searching, and together they waited for the moment when silence would break into revelation. Justice, when it came, was incomplete. Daniel Whitehorse sits in prison, and Sarah's remains have not been found, and the mountains keep their secrets. But Emma has answers now, imperfect and painful, better than the emptiness of not knowing. She visits her grandmother every Sunday, and sometimes they drive past the old house on Care Dam Road, and Emma looks at the porch where the wind chimes used to hang, and she thinks about the mother she barely remembers but has never forgotten. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.